February 7, 2000, Michael's fingers moved across the keyboard of his father's Hewlett-Packard desktop. On his screen, a list of dozens of compromised university servers, each one a soldier in his digital army. His target? Yahoo, often called the internet's front door in 2000, one of the most visited websites in the world, one of the most valuable tech companies on the planet, and it was about to go dark. He'd been planning this for weeks, testing, refining, making sure every compromised server would respond to his command. Now, while his parents thought he was doing homework, he was about to execute one of the largest cyber attacks the internet had ever seen. He typed the command, enter. The attack was simple but deadly. His network of infected computers flooded Yahoo's servers with so much fake traffic that real users couldn't connect, like blocking a highway by having thousands of cars drive in circles. The attack traffic came from everywhere at once, university networks across North America, all controlled by Michael from his bedroom in Montreal. Within minutes, Yahoo's homepage showed an error message. Engineers at Yahoo's headquarters in Santa Clara watched their monitoring systems light up red. Every server was drowning. One of the biggest websites on Earth was offline. Michael leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He just launched one of the largest denial of service attacks in internet history. He was also a high school sophomore who couldn't grow facial hair yet. The contrast was crazy. A teenager with acne had just caused what would be reported as over $1 billion in damage, though that number would later be heavily disputed. He had no idea the FBI was about to launch the biggest cybercrime hunt in history. He had no idea his online bragging would destroy him. He had no idea that the internet he'd just broken was about to break him back. But first, he needed to attack Amazon, eBay, CNN, and E-Trade, because stopping wasn't possible. Not when he was finally becoming a legend. His hacker name would soon be everywhere in the news. Mafia Boy, the teenager who took down the internet.
Michael Kaus found hacking in his early teens, which should have been the age for skateboarding or playing guitar. His father had bought him a computer when he was 6, and by his teenage years, Michael had moved from exploring machines to exploring networks. He discovered Internet Relay Chat, the underground forums where hackers met, shared tricks, and built reputations with nothing but screen names and technical skill. His education came from hacker chat channels. No formal training, no computer science classes, just obsessive reading of text files explaining how the internet actually worked. He learned that most computer systems weren't built for security, they were built for convenience. Every convenience was a weakness. According to his later memoir, his early experiments involved his father's computer. Michael would test exploits and occasionally crash the system, then work to fix it before anyone noticed. The thrill of breaking and repairing systems became addictive, that powerful mix of technical control and risk that would define the next few years. By his mid-teens, he'd moved from individual computers to entire networks. He reportedly tested attacks on his high school's network, taking down internet access temporarily, watching administrators panic, knowing he could restore everything with one command. The control was intoxicating, digital power from a basement bedroom. But high school networks weren't impressive to the hackers he looked up to. He needed bigger targets, better techniques, a reputation that would make the elite hackers respect him. In hacker culture, you weren't judged by age or looks. You were judged by what you could break. He started studying university networks, massive bandwidth, weak security, powerful servers. If he could compromise enough of them, he could build an army. What he built would become one of the most destructive attack networks of the early internet. He just needed to test it.
Imagine you're building an army, but your soldiers are computers that don't know they're soldiers. That was Michael's task in late 1999. Compromise university servers across North America, install his attack software, and control them as one weapon. The technical term is a botnet, a network of infected computers controlled from far away. Universities were perfect targets because they had exactly what Michael needed: super fast internet connections, way faster than home internet, often weak security monitoring, open networks for research, and powerful servers running 24/7. Each compromised server could create massive fake traffic. Dozens of compromised servers could create enough traffic to crash almost any website on Earth. The method was straightforward. Scan university networks for servers running outdated software with known weaknesses, exploit those weaknesses to get inside, install attack tools, variants of programs like Tribe Flood Network, and add the server to his botnet. Each new zombie expanded his army's power. By early 2000, according to various investigative reports, Michael had compromised dozens of high-bandwidth machines, university servers, and research computers across North America. These weren't community colleges. These were institutions with cutting-edge networks, which meant cutting-edge attack power. He built the digital version of a nuclear weapon. The institutions had no idea their systems had been turned into weapons. He tested his botnet on smaller targets, online gaming servers, minor websites. The results were instant. Sites went offline within seconds, then struggled to come back for hours. The power was intoxicating. But the elite hackers he wanted to impress weren't impressed by attacks on gaming servers. He needed to prove himself with a target so huge, so impossible to ignore, that his handle, Mafia Boy, would become legendary. He chose Yahoo, then one of the most important websites on Earth. What happened next would trigger global economic panic and a worldwide manhunt. He pressed enter on February 7th, 2000. There was no going back.
February 7th, 2000, Yahoo's engineers stared at monitors showing their servers drowning in traffic. Not real traffic, attack traffic. Millions of requests per second from hundreds of sources, all coordinated, all hitting at once. Their systems couldn't tell real users from the attack, so everything crashed. Yahoo went completely offline. For context, in 2000, Yahoo was the internet. It was the main search engine, email provider, and news site for hundreds of millions of users. When Yahoo died, a huge chunk of the digital economy stopped working. Many online services, including news and finance portals, were disrupted. Companies couldn't send email. Students couldn't research papers. The internet, this supposedly unbreakable, decentralized network, had a weak point, and a teenager in Montreal had just hit it. Michael watched news sites, the ones still working, report the attack. CNN called it unprecedented. The FBI opened an investigation. Tech experts guessed it was foreign governments or serious criminal gangs. No one suspected a 15-year-old in his bedroom. But Michael wasn't finished. Over the next few days, he launched attacks against other major sites: Amazon, eBay, Buy.com, CNN.com, E-Trade, and ZDNet went offline for hours. Industry analysts at the time estimated up to $1.2 billion in total losses, a figure later heavily disputed in court where provable damages were documented at roughly $7.5 million. The actual economic impact remains debated to this day, with estimates varying widely depending on how damages were calculated. Imagine you're a small business owner. Your entire company exists online. One morning, your website stops loading. Not because of a bug, because someone with a botnet decided to erase you from the internet for fun. You lose sales, customers, trust. Your competitors who weren't attacked steal your business. When your site finally returns, customers have already moved on. That was reality for thousands of businesses during Michael's week-long campaign.
Michael had just executed one of the most destructive cyber attacks in history, caused massive damage, and embarrassed the FBI. His smart move? Disappear, delete evidence, never speak of it again. Instead, he bragged. In IRC hacker channels, the same forums where he'd learned his skills, Michael, using his handle Mafia Boy, started claiming credit. Not obviously at first, but through technical references that other hackers understood. Discussions of botnet capabilities, attack methods, target selection, details that suggested insider knowledge. This is where Michael's age betrayed him. Experienced criminals understand that reputation in the underground is worthless if it leads to prison. But Michael was 15. He'd grown up in hacker culture, where your handle was your identity, where respect came from showing technical skill.
where anonymity meant you could brag without consequences. He was wrong. According to later reports from Wired and investigative summaries, certain IRC channels were being monitored by informants cooperating with law enforcement. Chat logs were being collected, conversations documented, timelines built. When Michael discussed the attacks with technical specificity, mentioning compromised servers, institutions he'd infiltrated, even tools he'd used, those conversations were reportedly shared with authorities, including the FBI and RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Investigators began piecing together clues from the online chatter, references to being Canadian, attending high school, living near Montreal. Combined with technical knowledge and the attack timeline, investigators narrowed their search to possible suspects in the Montreal area. They started monitoring local internet providers for suspicious connections to compromised university servers. In mid-April 2000, roughly 2 months after the attacks, the RCMP reportedly identified Michael's home IP address, making connections consistent with botnet control. They had him. Michael logged off that night not knowing police were preparing a raid. By the next morning, his bedroom door would be breached by officers. Everything he'd built was about to collapse.
Early morning, April 15th, 2000. Michael's bedroom door opened, not by his parents calling him for breakfast, but by RCMP officers with a warrant. Agents entered his home in West Island, Montreal, while his family watched in shock. His father, whose computer Michael had learned on years earlier, stood in the hallway trying to understand what was happening. His mother asked if this was a mistake. It wasn't. As Wired and the FBI later reported, RCMP cybercrime unit agents seized Michael's computer, floppy disks, notebooks, and anything that could store data. On his hard drive, they found IRC chat logs. They found lists of compromised servers, dozens of them, with IP addresses, login credentials, installation dates. They found attack software configured for coordinated strikes. They found everything. Michael's initial reaction, according to reports, moved from defiance to denial to quiet acceptance as agents presented the evidence. He'd documented his own crimes thoroughly, repeatedly, in digital conversations meant to impress strangers. The evidence was overwhelming, which meant the legal outcome should have been clear, potentially decades in prison for massive damages across international targets. But there was a complication that would save Michael's life while enraging his victims. He was 15 years old when the attacks occurred. Under Canadian law, he would be tried as a youth, unless prosecutors could prove exceptional circumstances warranting adult court. Within 24 hours, Michael's arrest became international news. Mafia boy captured headlines ran globally. The FBI held a press conference, calling it a landmark case in international cybercrime cooperation. Tech companies demanded harsh punishment to stop future attacks. But Michael's defense lawyers had a powerful argument. He's a child who made terrible mistakes, not a hardened criminal deserving adult prison. The question became, how do you punish a teenager for breaking the internet?
If you are enjoying this video, consider subscribing to Arxis to dive deep into the real stories behind the world's most notorious hackers. A like really helps the channel, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. January 18th, 2001, Montreal Youth Court. Michael Kous stood before Judge Gilles Ouellette, facing 56 charges, including mischief to data and illegal access to computer systems. If tried as an adult in the United States, he could face multiple sentences. In Canadian Youth Court, the maximum sentence was 3 years in youth detention. Prosecutors argued that the scale of damage, initially reported in widespread news coverage as over $1 billion, though actual provable losses documented at trial were significantly lower at roughly $7.5 million, demanded exceptional punishment despite his age. They presented victim impact statements from small business owners whose companies nearly collapsed during the attacks. They showed evidence of economic disruption. They argued that being lenient would signal to other teenage hackers that massive cybercrimes carried minimal consequences. Michael's defense argued that he acted without understanding the real-world impact of his actions, that he was a child seeking online validation, that he showed genuine regret. Court records note he appeared emotional when confronted with victim statements, and that rehabilitation was possible. They emphasized that Michael had no prior criminal record, came from a stable family, and was otherwise a normal teenager who made extraordinarily bad decisions. Judge Ouellette's problem was unprecedented. How do you balance one of the largest cyber attacks in history against the youth of the person responsible? The legal system generally treats young offenders differently precisely because their brains aren't fully developed, their judgment is weak, and rehabilitation is more achievable. But Michael's crimes weren't shoplifting or vandalism, they were international economic disruption. The courtroom was packed. Victims wanted justice. Michael's family wanted mercy. The tech industry wanted an example made. The judge had to decide what justice meant for a 15-year-old who broke the internet. The answer would shock everyone and reveal a fundamental question about how we punish children for adult-scale crimes.
The sentence came down: 8 months in youth detention, 1 year of probation, restricted internet access until age 18, and mandatory community service. Michael would serve his time in a youth facility, not federal prison. He would be released before his 17th birthday. Victims were outraged. 8 months for damage that had been widely reported in the billions, even if proven losses were far smaller, felt like nothing. But for Michael, the sentence was devastating in a different way. 8 months without computers, without the internet, without the digital world that defined his identity. For someone whose entire sense of self came from his online reputation, it was like telling a writer they can't read for a year. Michael entered youth detention in early 2001, just after his 16th birthday. In his 2008 memoir, Kelsey recalled struggling with what could be called digital withdrawal, physical anxiety from being disconnected. For years, his identity had been Mafia Boy, legendary hacker, breaker of systems, feared and respected in underground channels. Now, he was just another teenager in detention with no keyboard. The isolation, he later described, forced him to confront what he'd actually done. Reading victim statements without the numbing distance of a screen made the human cost real. A small online bookstore owner who lost tens of thousands of dollars. A startup that couldn't survive days offline. Employees losing jobs. Michael had treated these as abstract numbers, points scored in a digital game. In detention, they became people. The days were identical. Wake up, breakfast, classes, lunch, recreation, dinner, lights out, repeat. No screens, no internet, no escape into the digital world where he'd felt powerful. Just silence and his own thoughts. One realization became clear. He'd been addicted, not to drugs or alcohol, but to hacking, to the rush of breaking systems, to the power of controlling networks from his bedroom. Understanding the addiction didn't make it easier, but it was the first step towards something that seemed impossible: change. The question that haunted him: who was he without a keyboard?
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Arxis for more deep dives into the world's biggest cyber crimes. Check out this next investigation and let me know in the comments what hackers we should cover next.